Hi, I'm Kurt Von Diest for RGG EDU, and we're working on Turnup Ramen. So I have two files here. Rob has indicated that 462 is his hero file, and he's given me another capture where the fill card has been brought in just to fill in a couple shadows and get a little detail in this green leaf on the right. I tend to prefer a little bit more shadow in these. I think those are sprouts in the back of the bowl. So I think I would just use this fill card for this leaf over on the right hand side. Looking at this in Capture One, Rob has applied a crop to this image, and I'm going to go ahead and remove that crop, as is my standard working practice. We can always crop later. So this image has the auto white balance from the camera, and it feels a little cold to me. I'm questioning the color in this file, so I thought I would just explore with that in Capture One. If there's any shift in color that's a color temperature issue, adjusting that in Camera Raw is going to give you the most flexibility. You want to bring it into Photoshop as close to neutral or in the realm of the color that you want. Color is very fluid, even in Photoshop. We can adjust it in all sorts of ways, but adjusting the color temperature in Camera Raw is just the same as adjusting it in the camera. So I want to take advantage of that extreme fluidity of color in Camera Raw if I need to. So in this case, I don't have a capture with a gray card to gray balance off of. Perhaps they shot it, I didn't ask. In any case, I don't have it handy. So with my color dropper, I'm just sampling different places that should be neutral until I find a place that feels just overall a little more balanced. I can compare this to where we were, the other image, which is the native color balance. And I think that this is in a nicer place. There's kind of this warm glow coming from the windows. I may decide to cool that back off in Photoshop, but the whites of the bowl are feeling a lot more neutral, and I think that's more appropriate. So I'm going to copy these adjustments and apply them to my other capture, where I'm going to use this piece of the leaf where the fill card is. I'm going to select both and process them out to bring them into Photoshop. And first thing, I'm going to combine the two images. I'm going to hold down the Shift key so that they lock in based on the outside dimensions of the image, so that they are lined up. As long as the camera or the subjects didn't move, they'll be lined up or close to it. And now I'm going to hold down Option and add a mask so that it goes ahead and makes it black. And I can just paint white on my mask to reveal the section of this leaf that the fill card is opening up. Just gets a few more highlights in there. The leaf did shift around just a little bit in the bowl between these two captures. So on the far right side, it shifts a little bit from one to the other. I'm going to be sure I get that whole leaf in there. I'm going to shift click this mask just to decide if I want to use, I may use some of this for some of this fill in this other area, but I don't want to go full on there. So I'm only using this frame for just a few pieces of it. So just to help keep my file size a little lower, if I'm pretty confident that I've made this all set up in the right way, I can go ahead and apply my mask. And that's going to remove all the pixels that were masked off. Generally, I don't make a habit of doing that, but I only do it in cases where I'm pretty certain that I've made a good adjustment and the piece that I'm using is, the section of the piece that I'm using is much smaller than the overall size of the piece. Then it makes sense just to limit the number of pixels that are in my file, creating a bigger file size, but have no effect whatsoever because they're masked off. Now I'm just going to continue with the rest of cleanup in my image. So I was cloning along this gradient and realized it was not matching. So I might switch over to the spot healing brush tool, because that does a pretty good job along a gradient as long as you're not right up against an edge. Getting down into the ramen bowl itself. This is looking all very delicious. So not much I need to clean up in there. Might just simplify a few of these reflections on the outside of the bowl. I don't want to overdo it. There's a nice striation to the glazing of this bowl. So I want to be sure that I'm following along those lines with my clone. And just getting the most extreme reflections just softened a little bit. And there's a little imperfection in the glazing, it looks like, where there's this chunk taken out. So I'm going to use my clone stamp just to refine that and soften that little chunk. Down here at the base of the bowl, there are some little funky spots. It looks like some hair stuck to the bottom of the bowl, some fuzz or something. Take that out. I'm going to finish up on the front edge of this table. Just cleaning it up. Now there's this welded part that looks like it would be, I'm not sure what function that serves. Perhaps it's the end of a crossbar or something, but it looks like a table leg that's just cut off in mid-air. But obviously this counter is like a cantilever, and this is not a supporting table, supporting leg of the table. So I think I'll just remove this because it's a big distraction. I'm going to make a new layer for this. So essentially I'm just going to clone in straight lines. I want to follow this line, and I want to follow this line, and then the background is all just a gradient. So if I set this up correctly, and I set my source point right on this line, and then I'm going to come with a room to spare, and then I'm going to come right on that line again and establish my source to destination points. And now if I just paint right, I should be able to work most of this out without changing my source point. Now that's only true if the source point lined up really well. So that gets us most of the way there. And just need to do a little bit of cleanup to make this background gradient nice and smooth. I'm cloning back in the other direction. And just at the far end of this, I'll refine that line to taper it down. Zoomed out, I notice just a little bit of unevenness in this background gradient. So I'll just work on that just a bit more with a really low opacity brush just to smooth that out. You can see the effect that has overall on my picture. Yeah, that's nice. I don't need that. It doesn't add anything to the story. Let's get rid of it. Great. So now I'll look at adding a little contrast, particularly to the bowl. I'd like this all to get a little brighter. Adding contrast will punch up the colors in there a bit more. There's this red paprika kind of pepper and the yellow of the eggs and the white of the eggs and the green. All sorts of nice colors going on in there. So flip that to black, and I want to mask it in real specifically to the bowl, but with a lower opacity brush, 20%, I'm going to paint outside of the bowl too. So adding contrast, adding more specular light that's adding contrast into the bowl, it should also spill out outside of the bowl some as well. Just see what I can pull out of this leaf and these greens. I'm just not quite satisfied with their color and exposure. So kind of make a more extreme adjustment, and I'm going to paint it in little dappled bits. So going back to my pixel layers here, I'm noticing in this wine glass there's some kind of dark reflection shapes that are really catching my eye. And so I just want to tone those down just so that they're not quite so black. And all those reflections become a little more subtle. I'm going to explore for contrast of exposure and contrast of the background table surface and the foreground floor. See what it looks like brighter, see what it looks like a little darker. I think going into this kind of like we're in this noodle cafe and it's a sunset hour outside. I could look at the metadata and see really when this was taken. But I can also just kind of picture it in my head. There is a warmth and color to the light here. And looking at the extreme foreground, the floor and table in front of our bowl, I think I'd like to open that up a bit more. Just to kind of help anchor my eye in the foreground of this picture and the lower half of this picture. Noticing some kind of pinkness in the light, in the background. So I'm just kind of questioning if that's right. Just shift this color balance, and it's more on the stools and the floor over here that I'm questioning that color balance. So just kind of tease this in here and there. Look at my before and after, see the progress that I'm making. I think where I darkened the table surface here maybe was too much, so I'm find that layer and I'm going to mask that off. There being a big window here, it makes sense that this would be bright spilling this way. Retouching is an act of revision. Do something, see if it looks good, come back to it, decide if you still think it looks good, maybe try something else, come back to it, decide if that still is looking good. You can't you can't let yourself fall into the trap of thinking, oh, I already made that decision. I'm going to live with that decision because I already made it. Run my burn and dodge action. Give this a nice little vignette in the front corners, back corners as well. The floor. Just look at dodging this extreme table out just a little bit so that it stays real bright back by the window and transitions gradually into the food. Also dodge out the blue of our napkin a little bit because some of that's getting lost into the shadow. I like that blue adds and rounds out the color story really nicely. We have the red and the yellow and the green going on. Just going to look at my before and after, see the progress that we're making. Now I'm getting caught up on these highlights that are on the back edge of the glass. I'm just going to tone those down a little bit. I don't want to remove them completely. And I'm going to do some sharpening, so I need to do my stamp visible, turn off my adjustment layers, and hit Command, Option, Shift, and E. Layer ready for me to run unsharp mask on. And a low amount and a higher radius. 2040 is a good starting place, I find. In this case, that's what I'm going to go with. And I'm going to mask it on just into the in focus section of my food bowl and the chopsticks. Oh, there's chopsticks here. So now that I'm thinking about these chopsticks, I think I might call a little bit more attention to them just by clarifying the highlight. So I'm just dodging out this highlight. And this highlight. And this highlight. Just so those points separate nicely from the background. And one more time, check my before and after. And I'm happy with how this image is looking, so I'm going to save it and dream of eating this later on.